The dark night. As the parents left the house, 17-year-old Sarah settled in for what she thought would be a relaxing night of babysitting for the Smith. 2 kids, Timmy and Emily. The kids were already in bed, and Sarah was watching TV on the couch when she started to feel a creeping sense of unease. At first, she brushed it off as mere paranoia, but as the hours ticked by, the creaks and groans of the old house began to sound more sinister. Suddenly, Sarah heard a faint scratching noise coming from the kids' bedroom. She got up to check on them and found Timmy sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with fear. "The monster is coming," he whispered. Sarah tried to reassure him, but as she turned to leave, she saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure vanished when she turned on the light, but Sarah's heart was racing. She tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just her imagination. However, as the night wore on, strange noises continued to echo through the house. Doors creaked open and shut, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Sarah's anxiety turned to terror when she heard Emily's voice whispering, "Help me," from her crib. She rushed to the room, but Emily was fast asleep. That's when Sarah saw the words, "They're coming," scrawled on the wall in red crayon. As the night descended into chaos, Sarah realized she was trapped in the house with something malevolent. The kids seemed to be under some kind of dark influence, and Sarah was the only one who could hear the sinister whispers echoing through the halls. In a desperate bid to escape, Sarah grabbed her phone and called for help, but the line was dead. The darkness closed in around her, and she knew she had to get out of there fast. But as she reached the front door, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and everything went black. The next morning, the police found Sarah's phone on the porch, the screen shattered. The Smiths returned home to find their children safe and sound. But Sarah was never seen again. The house was left abandoned, its dark secrets locked within its walls. Some say that on certain nights, you can still hear Sarah's screams echoing through the empty halls. The Midnight Scream. As soon as the parents left the house, the 3 kids started getting restless. It was a Friday night, and they were stuck with the most boring babysitter in the world, Mrs. Jenkins. She was old, strict, and had a permanent scowl etched on her face. The kids, Tim, 10, Emily, 7, and Ben, 4, had been warned not to cause any trouble, but as the hours ticked by, they grew more and more mischievous. Mrs. Jenkins tried to keep them occupied with books and games, but they were having none of it. As the clock struck midnight, strange noises began to echo through the house. At first it was just creaks and groans, but soon the sounds grew louder and more menacing. Mrs. Jenkins tried to brush it off as the old house settling, but the kids were terrified. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Mrs. Jenkins told the kids to stay calm and wait for her to find the flashlight. But as she got up to search for it, the kids heard her whispering to herself in a voice that wasn't her own. "Get out while you still can." The kids exchanged fearful glances. What was happening to Mrs. Jenkins? As they watched in horror, her eyes turned black, and her face contorted into a grotesque grin. The kids tried to scream, but their voices were frozen in their throats. Mrs. Jenkins, or whatever was controlling her, began to stalk towards them, her eyes fixed on them with an unspeakable hunger. The last thing the kids remembered was the sound of their own screams, echoing through the darkness. As Mrs. Jenkins' grin grew wider and wider, when the parents came home, they found the kids catatonic, their eyes wide with terror. Mrs. Jenkins was never seen again. but the neighbors reported hearing strange noises coming from her house, the sound of children screaming, and a voice whispering, "Get out while you still can." The watcher in the window. It was supposed to be a routine babysitting job for 17-year-old Sarah. She had taken care of the Smith kids many times before, and they always behaved. But tonight was different. A fierce storm was brewing outside, and the kids were restless. As Sarah settled them in for a movie, she noticed a strange feeling of being watched. She tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the sensation only intensified as the night wore on. Every time she glanced out the window, she saw nothing but darkness and the reflection of the TV screen. That was when she saw him, a figure standing just beyond the glass, his eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she tried to convince herself it was just a tree branch swaying in the wind. But the figure didn't move. The kids were oblivious to the danger lurking outside, completely absorbed in their movie. Sarah knew she had to protect them, but she was frozen in fear. The figure began to move closer, its face pressed against the glass, eyes locked on the children. Sarah's scream was drowned out by the thunder as she frantically called 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was the only thing that kept her from collapsing. "Help is on the way," she assured Sarah. But as Sarah turned back to the window, the figure vanished. The storm raged on, but the silence was more terrifying. When the police arrived, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of forced entry, no suspicious persons nearby. Just the Smith kids, still engrossed in their movie, and Sarah shaken to her core. It wasn't until later, when the family reviewed the security footage, that they saw him, the figure in the window, his face distorted, watching the children with an evil grin. The police never caught him, but the Smith family never left their children with a babysitter again, and Sarah never forgot the eyes that watched her that stormy night. The Devil's Sitter. When the Smiths hired 19-year-old Emma to watch their 3 kids, they thought it was a done deal. Emma had great references and a warm smile. But little did they know, Emma wasn't the one moving into their home that night. Something else was. At first, everything seemed normal. Emma played games with the kids, cooked them dinner, and tucked them into bed. But as the night wore on, the kids began to notice strange things. Emma's smile seemed to stretch a bit too wide, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. 8-year-old Sarah whispered to her brother, "Look at Emma's eyes, they're black." But when they glanced up, Emma's eyes were normal again. The kids brushed it off as their imagination, but the feeling of unease lingered. As bedtime stories turned into eerie tales, Emma's voice took on a hypnotic quality. The kids felt themselves being pulled into her words, as if they were under some sort of spell. When Emma told them to go to sleep, they obeyed without question, their eyelids heavy as stones. But 10-year-old Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He watched as Emma's face seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a thrown stone. Jake tried to scream, but his voice was trapped in his throat. The next morning, the Smiths returned home to find the kids fast asleep, with Emma nowhere to be found. But on the kitchen counter, a message was scrawled in red. "I've been here before. I'll be back." The police searched for Emma, but she was never found. The Smiths never saw her again. But some say on certain nights when the moon is full, Emma's face appears in the windows of that house, her eyes black as coal, her smile twisted in a malevolent grin. The Smiths moved out of that house, But the legend of the Devil's Sitter lived on, a cautionary tale about the horrors that can lurk in the most unsuspecting of places.